Ever wondered about the darkest and most shocking cases of incest and inbreeding in history? Well, we're about to reveal 20 of the most disturbing examples where family ties crossed forbidden boundaries, leading to truly unsettling outcomes. These stories expose the extreme consequences of defying both social norms and genetic laws. Brace yourself as we dive into these harrowing chapters of human history. Number 20. Nils Lykke. Nils Lykke's life took a dramatic and dark turn when he attempted to marry his deceased wife's sister, igniting a scandal that would lead to his gruesome end. While he's often remembered as a character in Henrik Ibsen's play Lady Inger of Austria, the real Nils Lykke lived in 16th century Norway and paid a heavy price for his choices. After the death of his wife Elena in 1532, Nils set his sights on her sister, Lucy. Despite Elena being gone, the law still viewed this relationship as incestuous, which was a serious crime. Nils, perhaps thinking he could outmaneuver the law, attempted to have his marriage to Lucy annulled to avoid prosecution. However, this bold move only made things worse. Nils, his brother-in-law, a powerful nobleman, was outraged by the audacity of Nils' actions, and the situation became even more explosive when Nils and Lucy conceived a child. The scandal spread quickly, reaching the ears of the archbishop, who ensured that Nils would face justice. In 1535, Nils was convicted, and his punishment was both brutal and unique. He was smoked to death, a horrifying end that matched the intensity of his crime. Number 19. Charles Darwin.
An admirer and fellow naturalist who told him that he had reached the same conclusion. Evolution was produced by nature.
Charles Darwin is a name we all recognize, mostly for his groundbreaking work in evolution and his famous book On the Origin of Species. But beyond his scientific achievements, Darwin was also a devoted husband to Emma Wedgwood Darwin, who was actually his first cousin. The Darwins had a large family, with 10 children in total. Sadly, 3 of their children died young, and of the 7 who survived, 3 were infertile. Darwin, being the meticulous scientist he was, kept detailed records of not just his health, but also the health of his entire family. When his children fell ill, Darwin couldn't help but worry. His mind went straight to his research on inbred plants, and he feared that his marriage to Emma, a close relative, had led to their children inheriting genetic weaknesses. Later research would reveal that Darwin's concerns weren't far off. Scientists examined 4 generations of the Darwin and Wedgwood families and found numerous marriages between close relatives on both sides. The genetic similarities between the families likely contributed to the health problems that plagued Darwin's children, just as he feared. Number 18. King Tut.
Tutankhamun is the most famous name of all these ancient kings. But during his lifetime,
when King Tutankhamun's tomb was unearthed in 1922, it was a major event. The world was captivated by the dazzling image of the young pharaoh, especially the golden mask that adorned his sarcophagus. It became an iconic symbol of ancient Egypt. For the longest time, how Tutankhamun died remained one of history's biggest mysteries. People thought he might have died in a tragic chariot accident or even been murdered. But recent scientific advancements have shed new light on his death. Thanks to a virtual autopsy that involved over 2,000 scans of his mummy, we now have a clearer picture of what the 19-year-old pharaoh really looked like. And it's far from the idealized image we've seen in art. Tutankhamun had wide, feminine hips, a pronounced overbite, and even clubfoot. So, what caused these features? DNA analysis points to one thing: incest. Tutankhamun was the product of inbreeding, a common practice among Egyptian royals to keep the bloodline pure. Unfortunately, this led to a host of health problems. He suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy, malaria, and the excruciatingly painful Kohler disease, any of which could have contributed to his early death. And it didn't stop there. Tutankhamun himself was in an incestuous marriage with his half-sister, Ankhesenamun. They had 2 daughters, but tragically, both were stillborn. This story is a powerful reminder of the devastating effects of inbreeding, even among the most powerful families in history. Number 17. Alexi Romanov. Alexi Romanov, the grandson of Queen Victoria, inherited what came to be known as the royal disease, for how it was inherited by a disproportionately large number of European royals, hemophilia. His frequent bouts of bleeding were so life-threatening that his mother, Tsarina Alexandra, sought help from the mythical Rasputin. Rasputin went on to gain an unwieldy amount of influence over the royal court in his efforts to save Alexi from the most severe effects of the disease. Alexandra and her husband, Tsar Nicholas, were sure that his treatments were healing their son. However, aristocrats and others close to the royal family weren't quite so sure. Rasputin's character was tainted with alcoholism and sexual promiscuity, as well as dabblings in the occult. While he may or may not have been guilty of those things, to the Russian people, as well as the aristocracy, he symbolized everything that was wrong with the royal family. Disorder and discontent grew, and in 1917, the Russian Revolution began. The jury is still out on whether or not Alexi's illness could be considered a causative factor in the Russian Revolution, the fall of the Romanovs, and the execution of the royal family. However, it certainly didn't help. Number 16. Princess Naanaa of Hawaii. Princess Naanaa of Hawaii, born in 1815, found herself in a difficult position during a major time of change. Christian missionaries were gaining influence across Hawaii, but the traditional Hawaiian chiefs were determined to hold on to their beliefs. Naanaa's mother, Keopuolani, who was King Kamehameha's highest-ranking wife, raised her daughter as a Christian. But with the growing tension between the Hawaiian chiefs and the missionaries, Naanaa found herself caught in the middle like a rope in a tug-of-war. In Hawaiian royalty, incest wasn't uncommon, especially between siblings. It was often expected by the chiefs. In 1834, Naanaa married her brother, which sparked outrage among the Christians and converted Hawaiians. They rejected her, leaving her isolated and outcast. Torn between her devotion to the church and her love for her brother, Naanaa sought forgiveness from the missionaries. A year later, in 1835, she married outside her family to Leleiohoku, the son of Chief Kalinamoku. Although Naanaa cared for Leleiohoku, her feelings for her brother remained strong. She became pregnant, and her brother publicly claimed the child as his own. Once again, Naanaa was shunned and lived in isolation until her daughter was born. Tragically, the baby died just hours after birth, and Naanaa, consumed by guilt and sorrow, passed away shortly after. Number 15. Barbara Daly-Bakeland.
There, and with a good amount of money with them, they used the insurance settlement to set themselves up as
Born in 1922, Barbara Daly-Bakeland was a wealthy American socialite whose modeling photos once graced the pages of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. On the surface, she seemed to have it all, but beneath that glamorous exterior, Barbara was battling severe mental instability. She and her husband Brooks lived a life of excess, lavish parties, heavy drinking, and affairs on both sides. But eventually, Brooks had enough of Barbara's erratic behavior, her outbursts, and multiple suicide attempts. He filed for divorce, and their son, Anthony, went to live with his mother. Anthony, unfortunately, inherited his mother's struggles with mental illness, including schizophrenia. By the time he was 20, Barbara learned that Anthony was involved with a bisexual man named Jake Cooper. In a misguided attempt to fix her son, Barbara hired prostitutes to try to coerce Anthony into having sex with women. When that didn't work, she took drastic measures, allegedly manipulating her own son into an incestuous relationship, hoping to cure him. But this tragic story doesn't end like other infamous cases of incest. On November 17, 1972, 25-year-old Anthony snapped and killed his mother with a kitchen knife. When the police arrived, they found Anthony calmly ordering Chinese food. After his release from prison, Anthony nearly repeated the tragedy by almost stabbing his grandmother to death. Number 14. John and McKenzie Phillips.
Them all away. So there's this sort of this imbalance of, I want to live, but man.
Imagine the iconic harmonies of California Dreamin' and Monday Monday. Picture a group of friends living the bohemian lifestyle of the 1960s. That's the image we have of the mamas and the papas. But behind the sunny facade, there was a darker side. John Phillips, the leader of the group, was seen as a charming and charismatic figure. But his daughter McKenzie revealed a shocking truth. In 2009, she went public with a harrowing tale of incestuous abuse at the hands of her father. It started when McKenzie was just 19. After a drug-fueled night before her wedding, she woke up to find her father having sex with her. This disturbing relationship continued for over a decade, fueled by drugs and manipulation. The abuse finally ended when McKenzie became pregnant. Fearful that John was the father, she sought his help. According to her book, High on Arrival, John paid for an abortion, and the incestuous relationship came to an end. The revelation shocked the world. It painted a stark contrast to the image of the beloved group. It's a reminder that even iconic figures can have hidden depths, and that the truth can sometimes be more disturbing than fiction. Number 13. Thomas Weir and his sister. Thomas Weir and his sister shocked 17th century Edinburgh with their chilling confessions. Back then, witches typically practiced their dark arts in secret, only to be exposed when caught in the act. But Major Thomas Weir took a different approach. He openly confessed. Now, Weir wasn't just any witch. He was a respected Presbyterian, always dressed in black, which made his confession even more startling. One day, out of the blue, Thomas declared that he was in league with the devil. At first, no one wanted to believe him, and the idea of prosecuting him seemed absurd. But then, things took an even darker turn. Thomas also admitted to having an affair with his sister, who confirmed every word of his story. The authorities had no choice but to take action. The siblings were quickly convicted and executed together in 1670. To this day, no one really knows why they decided to confess, but the eerie legacy lives on. Weir's house is still said to be haunted, a chilling reminder of their strange and tragic tale. Number 12. Thomas Roode. Thomas Roode's shocking crime in 1672 led to a major change in the laws of the British colony that would later become Connecticut. Back then, there wasn't even a law against incest, so when Roode got his daughter Sarah pregnant, the colony had to figure out how to handle the situation from scratch. The governor turned to a group of ministers for guidance, and they agreed that incest should be treated as a capital offense. So Thomas Roode became the first and only man in U.S. history to be executed for sleeping with his daughter. But the story doesn't end there. The following year, Sarah was exonerated when authorities acknowledged that her father had assaulted her, clearing her of any wrongdoing. This case not only set a legal precedent, but also highlighted the need for laws that protected victims like Sarah. It's a dark chapter in history, but one that had a lasting impact on how such crimes were dealt with in the future. Number 11. Marion Iris Stout and his sister. Marion Iris Stout and his sister Sarah Little were at the center of a dark and twisted 19th century scandal. Sarah was trapped in a miserable marriage to Charles Little, a known womanizer and violent drunk. But things took a sinister turn when Sarah and her brother Marion allegedly started an affair. Fearing that Charles would expose their secret, the siblings came up with a deadly plan to silence him. They lured Charles out to a waterfall, and that's where Marion struck, bludgeoning him to death with a mallet. It seemed like they might get away with it, but their cover was blown when a piece of Sarah's clothing was found near Charles's body the next day. Marion ended up taking the fall for the murder. In 1858, he was hanged for the crime, but his execution was anything but smooth. It's a chilling story of betrayal, murder, and a desperate attempt to hide a forbidden affair, one that ended in a gruesome and tragic downfall. Number 10. Edward Hogden. Abuse can happen anywhere, even within the closest of families. Now let's talk about the horrifying tale of Edward Hogden, a man who not only assaulted his own daughter, but also denied their relationship. Harriet was a young girl when her father Edward began to abuse her. The abuse was repeated and horrific, leading to Harriet becoming pregnant twice. Despite her pleas and fear, Edward continued his monstrous actions. Years later, Harriet finally found the courage to reveal the truth to her mother. Her mother, shocked and horrified, immediately contacted the authorities. A warrant was issued for Edward's arrest. When confronted with the evidence, Edward shamelessly denied that Harriet was his daughter. He even claimed that she had consented to the abuse. But his lies were quickly exposed, and he was found guilty of his crimes. In 1831, Edward was executed for his heinous acts. His story serves as a reminder of the importance of speaking out against abuse and seeking justice.
A human being could be so demented and so evil that they would...
Number 9. Marcus Wesson. Marcus Wesson, a father and grandfather, was found guilty of horrific crimes. He was convicted of murdering most of his children and grandchildren and sexually abusing his daughters. Wesson raised his children in isolation, taking all their money and training them to kill each other. His eldest daughter is suspected of committing the murders and then taking her own life. The horrific incident unfolded in Fresno, California, where Wesson held his family captive, subjected them to abuse, and isolated them from the outside world. The victims, ranging in age from 1 to 25, were found dead in their home, each with a gunshot wound to the eye. The discovery of the bodies sent shockwaves through the community and the nation. Wesson's trial revealed the extent of his cruelty and manipulation. He was found guilty of 9 counts of first-degree murder and 14 counts of sexual abuse, including rape and molestation. His conviction and subsequent sentencing brought some measure of justice to the victims and their families, but the scars of the tragedy will likely last for generations.
Was the second witness of the day. Her testimony was difficult to hear and to watch as she relived on the stand the birth of...
Number 8. Daniel and Ashley Reinhardt. If you thought the last case was shocking, get ready for this one. Daniel Reinhardt was a man who hid a secret so dark it's hard to believe. This isn't a story about a casual affair. It's about a father's abuse of his own daughter. Reinhardt began his horrific relationship with his daughter Ashley when she was just 5 years old. His wife knew about it, but instead of protecting Ashley, she threatened the other children to keep silent. Ashley gave birth to 4 children, but tragically 3 of them didn't survive. Reinhardt and his wife callously placed the bodies of those 3 children in coolers and left them on a farm to die. One of Ashley's surviving children finally found the courage to speak out, leading to Reinhardt's arrest. Despite his claims of a consensual relationship, he was convicted of incest, rape, and other heinous crimes. The Reinhardt case is a stark reminder of the evil that can exist within families. It's a story that's difficult to hear, but it's important to remember the victims and bring attention to the horrifying reality of child abuse. Number 7. Ferdinand I of Austria. Ferdinand I of Austria came from a prestigious lineage as a descendant of Joanna of Castile. His parents, Emperor Franz II and Mary Theresa, were double first cousins, which was a common practice in royal families to keep the bloodline pure. Ferdinand's birth was marked by challenges. He had hydrocephaly, also known as water on the brain, which put pressure on his sensitive brain tissue and led to developmental issues. On top of that, He had the notorious Habsburg jaw and struggled with epilepsy. Despite these hurdles, Ferdinand was chosen to be the heir to the throne to ensure the continuation of the Habsburg dynasty. During his reign, he was the king of Hungary, Austria, Bohemia, Lombardy, and Venetia. Due to his disabilities, he didn't take direct control of state affairs. These were managed by his counselors and regents. Ferdinand had a rather quirky pastime. He enjoyed sitting on the open end of a wastepaper basket and rolling around on the floor. Remarkably, he held the throne for 18 years before abdicating in 1848 in favor of his nephew, Franz Joseph. Ferdinand lived a long life and passed away at 82. After his reign, no other Habsburg was crowned King of Bohemia. Number 6. Maria, the Mad Queen of Portugal. Queen Maria, also known as Maria the Pious, is a fascinating figure, but not for the reasons you might expect. Her deep devotion was more than just a personal choice. It was a window into the mental health issues caused by the genetic disorders that come from being inbred royal. She was so obsessed with her faith that when her confessor passed away, she would throw intense temper tantrums, screaming about her damnation. And these weren't just ordinary screams. She would howl and make bizarre animal-like noises. Interestingly, Maria and England's notorious King George III shared the same physician, Dr. Francis Willis. He diagnosed Maria with insanity and subjected her to some pretty harsh treatments like ice baths, blistering, and laxatives. From a modern perspective, it's no surprise that none of these treatments worked and Maria was unable to fulfill her royal duties. Despite the severe effects of inbreeding on Maria, the practice continued. She married her uncle, and their son inherited some of these genetic issues, highlighting the ongoing struggles with royal intermarriage.
And abusing them sexually within his own family, which he controlled in a cult-like way.
Number 5. Eddie Lee Sexton. Eddie Lee Sexton, a notorious figure for all the wrong reasons, was not only a Satanist, but also a father who took abuse and control to horrific extremes. Over the years, he manipulated his children in a cult-like fashion, committing incest and subjecting them to brutal treatment. Sexton fathered 3 children with 2 of his daughters and pushed them to commit murders to increase his so-called power. Tragically, this led to a shocking incident where one of his daughters ended up smothering her baby, and his son strangled his own son-in-law with a rope. Sexton's reign of terror didn't last forever. After hiding out for a year to escape child abuse charges, he was finally caught. His defense attorney went so far as to label the Sextons as the most dysfunctional family in America. This case, one of the most disturbing examples of incest ever reported, grabbed national headlines. When the jury suggested the death penalty for Eddie Lee, his response was chillingly indifferent. He simply shrugged and said, "That's life." Just unbelievable. Number 4. Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria's family tree is a tangled web of European royalty from the 19th and 20th century. Her daughter, Princess Alice, was the mother of Tsarina Alexandra Romanov, the last Tsarina of Russia. She was also the grandmother of the final Viceroy of India and the great-grandmother of the Duke of Edinburgh. So, Victoria's bloodlines spread all across Europe. Now, here's a twist. Victoria's beloved Prince Albert was actually her first cousin, which meant their kids were technically inbred. On top of that, Victoria had a rare blood clotting disorder called hemophilia. She passed it on to her kids, and it continued to affect European royalty for generations. While Victoria herself didn't suffer much from it, the disease took the lives of one of her children and 5 of her grandchildren. Hemophilia is tricky because both parents need to carry the recessive gene. Victoria's case was a unique type known as hemophilia B. There's some chatter that Edward, the Duke of Kent, might not have been her biological father. For a rare disease to show up so prominently among relatives, some speculate that Victoria might have been a product of inbreeding herself. Number 3. Cleopatra. Cleopatra's family was no stranger to scandalous behavior, and the incestuous relationships in her lineage are a prime example. Her parents were siblings, and Cleopatra herself took things further by having relationships with both of her brothers. Yep, that's right, brothers, plural. This wasn't exactly unusual for Egyptian royalty back then. Cleopatra even had plans to marry her brother Ptolemy XIII to keep the power within the family. But things took a turn when Ptolemy XIII started to see Cleopatra as a threat and kicked her out. To regain her position, Cleopatra teamed up with Julius Caesar and ended up marrying her older brother Ptolemy XIV. There's speculation that she poisoned him to secure her rule. And if that wasn't enough, Cleopatra made sure her sister Arsinoe IV, who might have challenged her, was also eliminated. The drama and intrigue surrounding Cleopatra and her family make for some seriously wild history. Number 2. King Charles II of Spain. The Habsburg family was a powerhouse in Europe for hundreds of years. Their rule spanned from the 13th century, covering Austria, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, which, ironically, wasn't exactly Holy Roman or an empire. Marie Antoinette, France's last queen, came from this famous family. However, the Habsburgs had a major issue with inbreeding, which might have played a huge role in their eventual decline. For example, Joanne of Castile appears a staggering 14 times in their family tree. This inbreeding led to a condition known as the Habsburg jaw, an unusually large jaw and tongue that made basic activities like eating and speaking quite challenging. Charles II, the last Habsburg king of Spain, was a prime example of the consequences of this inbreeding. His jaw was so oversized that he struggled with eating and speaking, and he drooled excessively. He couldn't walk until he was 8, and even then, walking was a major struggle. Not exactly someone who would win a charm contest. Despite marrying twice, Charles couldn't have any children, likely due to his severe genetic issues. He passed away in 1700 at just 39 years old, leaving no heir and effectively ending the Habsburg reign in Spain. Number 1. Fred and Rosemary West. Ever heard of the phrase relationship goals? Yeah, you probably won't want to use it after this story. Let's talk about Fred and Rosemary West, a couple so twisted they're considered one of the most infamous serial killer duos in history. These two weren't just killers, they were a sick pair of sadists. Fred, the mastermind, had a rough childhood with claims of incest and abuse. But, let's be honest, that's probably just an excuse for his monstrous acts. He was a brute, a monster, and Rosemary, his twisted partner, was right there with him. Together, they terrorized England for decades, torturing, raping, and murdering young women. They dismember their victims, bury them in their own home, and even joke about it with the police. Imagine living in that house, knowing what horrors were happening just beneath your feet. One of the most chilling details is the abuse they inflicted on their own daughters. Fred's daughter, Anne-Marie, managed to escape, but his other daughter, Heather, wasn't so lucky. She disappeared, and when the police caught the Wests, Fred casually mentioned that she was buried under the patio. The West case is a horrifying reminder of the depths human evil can sink to. It's a story that's hard to comprehend, but it's also important to remember these victims and the families they left behind. If you found these shocking cases as unsettling as we did, remember that history often holds some dark and disturbing stories. The impact of these cases is a reminder of the consequences of extreme inbreeding and incest. It's crucial to understand these events to ensure that such tragedies are never repeated. Share your thoughts on these cases in the comments below. What did you find most shocking? Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.